Good morning, everybody. Good evening to those of you who are in Brazil and elsewhere, and good afternoon to those who are in South Africa and elsewhere. Just a real welcome to this seminar series on the future of higher education here at Tokyo College. And just before I introduce our speaker for today, I'd like to just make an announcement, if you don't mind, about the Q&A session, to say that the Q&A session will be recorded and to please just look out in the chat box for some details about the information that will be recorded and so on. But with that, it gives me great pleasure to introduce to you today Professor Elisa REIS, who's a professor of political sociology at the Federal University of Rio de Janeiro in Brazil. And she's sort of very kind of enthusiastically sort of agreed to kind of give this talk today, which I'm very, very pleased about. Professor REIS is also the chair of interdisciplinary research network for the study of inequality. South Africa and Brazil had the reputation of being very unequal societies, so it's an extremely important area. But she is also vice president of, she was vice president of the International Science Council until a year ago, and played a very vital role there. Also, she's also a fellow of the World Academy of Sciences. So she's very well represented in all of these sort of global structures, if you like. And my own sort of intersection with her was as president, she was president of UNPOX, which is the National Association of Social Science in Brazil, a really special organization. I attended a meeting there in 2004 or something, and there were about 2,000 social scientists, sort of Brazilian social scientists, who had gathered together in this wonderful place called Caxambu. That's my sort of personal connection, if you like. She has a PhD from MIT, and as you know, you can see from all of this, she's very accomplished and so on. So today, Elisa is going to be speaking to us about knowledge production as a public good, its challenges and opportunities. And I think it will fit in very well with the two previous talks we had, the one by Hillige van Blant from the International Association of Universities, and last week's talk by Andre Kiert on critical university studies and the challenges there. So, Professor REIS, I'm going to ask you to speak for about 25 minutes. If you can just shout out when you want your slides to be moved along, we'll do that. But thank you so much again, and welcome. And I hand over to you.
Okay, it's a real pleasure to be with all of you today. And I really want to thank you, Professor Ahmed Bal, for this kind invitation. It's fantastic to be able to use technology to address friends and colleagues. It would even be better if I could be in presence, but we have our limitations right now. So I'll be glad to speak to you about some thoughts I have on the subject, and perhaps you could expose my PowerPoint. Yes, thank you. You'll find out very soon that my PowerPoint is more a help to myself than to you. It's something I use to keep me on track, but perhaps it helps a bit of you as well, so you may move to the next. As I offer you just a brief outline of all the talks I'm going to talk, a brief introduction, a discussion about education in knowledge society, then the conversation about national and global goals. Finally, I get to the difficulties of choosing, and I'm suggesting some of our dilemmas are not really dilemmas when we can compromise. As a kind of helper, I would like to mention institutional collaboration, give you a few examples, And if there is time and you are interested, I can give you just a glimpse of the Brazilian landscape in terms of higher education. But to begin with, let's move to the introduction. You can move my slides. And I would like to start with an observation that if I was an education specialist, there will be many angles to explore. As I am not, there is even more angles that I could explore. But I'm just joking. The reason I am talking about higher education is mainly because I spent most of my life doing research and teaching in academic environments, and also because I've been involved in so many discussions about science, policy science in the global context, that I think I am entitled to offer to you some reflections I have on this subject. Starting with higher education and historical perspective, that's a personal bias of me. I always do macro historical analysis, and I think we should think of education as well in very broad historical perspective. I mean, if you think that a few centuries ago, education was a privilege of very few, and it was considered normal. No one questioned it, for example, that just some nobles or high bureaucrats were entitled to be highly educated. This was a natural thing, but things change as a civilizational process, and education more and more became to be recognized as a social right. Everybody has the right to enlighten him or herself. And that kind of evolution, it's clearly a progressive movement. I know that progress is a very contested notion those days, but I think we cannot avoid thinking of progress as a normative ideal. That's what we strive for. Even if some setbacks exist, we share a lot of experiences on inequality, but equality is the positive value. I think no one today would dare to say that, oh, I greatly enjoy inequality, because it is a social shared value that we all should be treated as equal. But thinking in historical terms, originally, in many contexts, education was not a right. It was more of a duty. And in Europe, the obligation to send children to school was imposed on adults, not to ensure children's rights, but to create means to convey the laws to everybody so that everybody would obey. So instead of a right, it was more of a duty. And somehow in the course of history, there is sort of a bias to perceive education essentially, mainly as a right, not as a duty. And I think we should reflect about that, because education is also a very good training on civic qualities, civism, solidarity, social cohesion, all of that is extremely benefited by education, and especially higher education, which is the privileged training for those kinds of skills that improve social solidarity. I'm suggesting the idea of consumption versus civism, because social rights today, or citizenship rights, are usually thought as consumption goods, as things we enjoy. But being citizen also means being responsible to the others. So when we discuss social cohesion today and the problems derived from lack of cohesion due to inequality, we are essentially thinking of the role of education and other social rights as civic instruments to improve conviviality, to improve the art of living together. We know that there are lots of distortions. Inequality is the basis of everything. But we also know that there are compensation policies which are essentially conceived through research on education, research that shows the importance of compensating these people who are not entitled to equality they should be entitled. Meritocracy is something very controversial. It is a good measure, but to be really fair, meritocracy must start from a common ground, and that is why compensation policies are so important. So as a way of introduction, my message is, let's think of education as both a right and a duty. And we can move to my second slide, my next slide. I would like to move now to the idea of the knowledge society. We know that we live in a knowledge society. Production is essentially moved by new knowledge every day. The progress of science are the key element in today's development process. But we also know there are serious risks involved. And with this slide, I want to call attention to the two sides of the coin, the virtues and the vices that the knowledge society can lead us to. The virtues are in our everyday experience. We have fantastic improvements in health, nutrition, communication means, like, for example, we are talking now from different parts of the world. I'm talking to you from down south in Brazil, and with a 12 hours difference, and we can immediately share ideas. So the virtues of the knowledge society are not confined to production only. There is also improvement in communication, in creating ties, etc. But we know that there are also vices that science can lead us to. The other side of the coin of the knowledge society are the immediate dangers we live on, be it by chemical weapons, atomic bombs, and pandemics, or very efficient ways to convey fake news. Especially if we think of artificial intelligence, we know all the promises and all the fears we have, because we don't know if we are going to be able to domesticate artificial intelligence to the beneficial side. But I mean, education is, I think it's a privileged means to strengthen the virtual side of knowledge. In connecting to what I was saying previously, I think that higher education is a very powerful instrument to stress the moral commitment of science. Higher education produces knowledge, but should also produce convey the message of the social responsibility of knowledge generated. And so these two dimensions, the instrumental side and the moral side, are not contradictory. They may eventually get in shock, but education is a means to create a common root so that both the instrumental and the ethical dimension of knowledge can work together. And then I pass to my next slide. Well, I am mentioned to you that science should be used for the visual side, that it should promote global goals, but I mean, common good. But what is common good? There could be national goals or global goals, or regional goals, or even local goals. When I say that science should benefit society, what's the meaning of society? We are used to think of society as nation states. I refer to Brazilian society, Japanese society, South African society. That's our natural reference. But there's nothing to prevent us from looking to society as different things. It's only the hegemony of the nation state that led us to naturalize the idea of society as being equal to nation states. It can be that too, but society is any set of people who share values, aspirations, context. I mean, it's important to think of education as useful at all levels of society. Sometimes they may contradict, but it should not be like that. If I think of education, of knowledge, science as common good, I'm saying that there are positive externalities generated by knowledge that can be pursued in some harmonious way. Of course, this is a normative conception, because naturally there might be, and there are conflicts between local and national, global. But if you think of knowledge as something that, at least as a tendency, is able to benefit everybody, then there are positive externalities of growth. Unfortunately, this also means that there might be negative externalities of knowledge growth. So it's always a question of setting parameters so that we can't conceive of common good as a real possibility. And it is. I tell you, for example, that one of my major areas of research is how wealthy people, elite people, not only wealth, but politicians, high people, people who control resources, political or economic, how do they conceive about poverty and inequality? It's funny because usually they don't think in common good terms. That's why they are not willing to redistribute. But if some circumstances led people who are wealthy, for example, to perceive that creation of more wealth for everybody benefits also the wealthier, then there is a chance to think of strategies to promote redistribution. That sort of a notion of externality that is not usually perceived as positive by wealthy people, but can eventually be conceived, occasionally, not eventually, occasionally be conceived as beneficial. I once compared Brazil and South Africa precisely, elites in both these two countries. How do they conceive of poverty and inequality? I did it twice. First time, in the 1920s, 1990s, I interviewed people in these countries, and Brazil and South Africa had wealthy people who thought very similarly. They would say, okay, poverty has to be controlled, but inequality is not a real problem. in the 1990s. I'm saying that Brazil and South Africa were similar because I compared them to 3 other countries, and they were the most one alike. Wealth in Brazil and wealthy people in Brazil and South Africa were very similar in terms of conception of poverty and inequality. Then, 20 years later, I went back and did the same interview. And then at that time, Brazil had wealthy people who thought very differently from South Africans. And you know what? Because for a short time span, in the beginning of this century, there were economic conditions and policy choices that made possible to create, to expand the purchasing power of the poor people. A new middle class was created in Brazil. And then a big portion of the wealthy people were able to perceive that creating wealthy for poor people also created good conditions to sell more products, to produce more. So a notion of positive externalities emerged. And I think the same, I mean, I don't want to go into too much details about another research, but what I'm saying is that we can think of knowledge also as a positive externality. For example, the problem of immigration in Europe. If instead of repressing migrants, there was global governance efficient enough and to promote conditions for creating job positions and economic perspective in the South, there would be a very good opportunity to create wealth in the South and to reduce the problem with immigrants in Europe. Or brain drain is another phenomenon. If instead of draining talented people to the north, you were to create conditions for them to stay in the South, there would be local benefits. You could say, well, but if we concentrate all the clever people in some place, they produce more. They generate more knowledge. That's not true. We know that there are problems of allocation. Economics tell us that it's better to have more spread conditions than just concentrated talent in some countries or some universities, whatever. So what are negative externalities can become positive externalities if we had kind of mechanisms to enforce and especially to convince those who control material and symbolic power that it is important to create equality conditions. I know this sounds a bit too ideal. It is an ideal, but as I'm saying, it's kind of a normative principle that can help solving problems and advancing progress. If we don't go for positive externalities, we may end up suffering the negative externalities. For example, in the case of chemical weapons, or well, let's talk about the climate change. The climate change is something that if we don't get together, we all will be penalized. So knowledge to control these problems are knowledge that are the most powerful weapon we have to convert negative externalities into positive ones. And with that, I want to move to my next slide because time is getting short. Even if I accept these ideal conditions, I know that they are not easy to enforce. And there are short-term problems that we have to think of them also. And I think in order to be concrete and operative, we must think of specific problems. I choose some of them, issues that are posed as dilemmas. Like, for example, there is all this discussion about universities become too bureaucratized, or else they become badly managed and when they are just collegiate. I've seen examples of both bias, and naturally, none of them contributes to generate better knowledge. We need bureaucracy because we need rationality, efficiency, but we also need collegiality. We also need decisions which are not constricted by essentially bureaucratic decisions. So sometimes I like to think of this problem as a balance between reproduction of knowledge and innovation. We need both. We cannot be just innovators because otherwise we don't know how to get to spread the innovation if we don't also reproduce knowledge already settled. So I think it's not a real choice between bureaucratization or just enlightenment. We need both. And we have to strike a balance between those two. Here in the South, we have examples, at least in Brazil, we have examples of both choices, and they don't work. We need to strike a balance. So the opportunity to solve this dilemma is to work together in terms of efficiency and in terms of creating, innovating, despite the need, without giving up regularity, efficiency, etc. Another example of dilemmas often discussed refers to specialization or cross-disciplinary collaboration. Here, I think it's not very easy to strike a balance. Of course, knowledge has advanced through specialization. And often when people try to train students into interdisciplinarity, the results are very superficial. But I think what is necessary to strike a balance between specialization and interdisciplinarity is to promote cross-disciplinary collaboration. Max Weber used to say something that I think is very wise. He said, every time two or more disciplines collaborate in an efficient way, they create a completely new discipline. And I think we are experiencing that. If you think, for example, of let's see, biophysics, for example, it's a successful combination of biology and physics. Or if you think of experimental economics, people are talking a lot about experimental economics those days. It's essentially a combination of psychology and economics. So this idea that we have to choose between too much specialization or too much interdisciplinarity is posed in the wrong way. We have to be disciplined. We have to learn one discipline, but we also must learn to talk to other disciplines. And I think more than ever, this has become visible to us. I mentioned, for example, the climate change. How can you solve it without involving several disciplines? Or how do you preserve biodiversity if you don't go beyond the mere technical things and to incorporate people's perception about the importance of preserving biodiversity? Or when we discuss social cohesion, everybody is scared because democracy is at risk in so many countries. There are risks posed by this lack of cohesion. And how do we ensure cohesion if you don't put together psychology, sociology, economics, engineering? We need to establish intelligent conversation between specialized people. Naturally, there will emerge new disciplines from that enlightened dialogue, but to generate the new knowledge to answer to these pressing existential risks, we need to combine several specialized knowledges. And my last example refers to utilitarian or civic goals. Many people think that the dilemma is between higher education to entitle people to produce more, to earn more, and other people think, think of education mainly as a civic mission. Actually, there is no contradiction between the two. To the contrary, going back to the idea of common good civic goals are the way to ensure better utilitarian results for everybody. So those dilemmas are not easy to solve, I know, but I think what is important is to think about possible solutions. That's the way to move forward. And with that, I want to go to my next slide, because I'm going to mention to you that I think institutional collaboration is an extremely powerful instrument to seize the opportunities for expanding knowledge. Education can certainly benefit, higher education especially, for interactions with different associations, organizations that are not strictly devoted to higher education can be very useful collaborators to help to find ways to seize opportunities, to minimize costs, and to advance progress. And just as an example, Ahmed mentioned UNPOX when he visited Brazil. UNPOX put together graduate programs in all the social sciences, sociology, anthropology, political science, geography, history, psychology. It's a way to put people from different disciplines discussing how to improve graduate programs, how to create opportunities for young scholars, etc. Other examples, for example, now under the pandemic, a group of scholars put together a World Pandemic Research Network. I was in the science committee of these people, and I could see how the simple existence of that network made it possible for so many people involved in research projects about pandemics to get together, to share objectives, to share problems, to help each other. So this was a very simple mechanism. We simply created a network saying, if you wanted to discuss a project on the pandemic, here are people who are doing the same, how don't you get in contact? And then we create opportunities for them to meet in a week seminar. And I think it's modest results, but important. Another initiative I very much like, I'm part of, is the International Panel on Social Progress. In this panel, we put together 300 social science from all over the world with very little resources and without government funds because we want to be independent. We made a diagnostic of all the advances of knowledge and technology in the last 50 or 60 years, and all of the risks involved, the frustrations. I mean, progress as a promise and as a failure. And we put together a 3-volume report published by Cambridge University Press in 2018 on all this balance we did about progress. To us is another example, the World Academy of Science for the Advancement of Science in Developing Countries, supported by UNESCO and a few other sources. To us is able to create short-term courses where people from the South go to other countries to teach students for a 2-year, periodically during 2 years, they go in back and forth. And there are several other initiatives of TUAS that I think could be useful to improve, and has been useful to improve higher education. My last example is my association. I was vice president, now I am a fellow of the International Science Council. Again, an instrument that can be useful to help higher education to seize the opportunities for improving knowledge and science. And so there are so many other institutional collaborations that can be useful. I don't think this is a panacea. I'm just saying that the art of getting together, as Tocqueville used to say, is a very important instrument to advance knowledge, to advance science, to advance progress. With that, I finish my general message. If you are interested, I can give you just one slide on the Brazilian landscape about higher education.
I think that would be with all the massive changes you've had recently. I think that would be very good. I think, and especially the storming of your parliament and so on. So please do spend a few minutes. Yes.
Yes. Okay. You know, we are around 2008 millions. The percentage of people above 25 with a college degree is 17%. Public education consumes 6% of GDP. It's not a high figure, a low figure for us. For a South country, it's a relatively good figure, but it's very badly used. It's mostly spent in bureaucracies and very little on real teaching. There are 223 higher education institutions. I mention institutions because many of them are not real universities. They are faculties, institutes, spare courses of higher education. But the public universities are 107. There are 8.6 million students in higher education, 6.5 in private institutions, of which 45% benefit from loans for tuition from the government. 300,000 professors, 1/3 of them in public institutions. The numbers might sound much more positive than they are. Private education is not, with a few exceptions, is not good. The results of it is 90% of research is done in public universities, and 70% just in 15 of the public universities. There has been a recent growth in student enrollment. This was actually in the beginning of the century, in the 2 terms of the now president again, Lula. Between 2005 and 2017, under the Labour Party, there was a growth of 100% in undergraduate enrollment and 200% in graduate studies. Of course, such a fast expansion hampers quality. There are problems of quality, but on the average, I think in civic terms, in terms of equality, the expansion of higher education has been very positive in Brazil, especially because the number of people who benefited from compensation policies, from quota system, is growing very fast. I mean, the percentage of Black students in higher education was practically new at the turn of the century. Now it's really growing. There are problems because, you know, public universities are the best and they are for free, but elementary and secondary education are not good in the public sector. So wealthy people who can afford private elementary and secondary school have much better chances to enter the universities, the public universities, through the contests, except by the quota systems. So it's kind of a perversity that those who can afford paying for previous stages get free education, while poor students, those who don't manage to enter the public universities that are very competitive, they end up in private institutions, and usually in the less prestigious careers, and they depend on loans from the government to pay tuition to those private universities. But as we have so many problems to solve in social terms, health, education, etc., Brazil still remains very unequal. There was a progressive redistribution movement under the Labour Party, not only because the Labour Party was more willing to do it, but also because we benefited from very good stimulus from the international commerce. In the beginning of the century, there was a boom for commodities. Brazil did very well. So it was easier to have new and more progressive social policies. Now, the Labour Party is back again. The conditions are much worse, not only because the international economy is not very promising in terms of for commodity, but also because in the last few years, there was a destruction of so much that had been built by the Labour Party. So not only in terms of education, health, but also in terms of the basic democratic institutions. So now the new government has all the good intentions, plenty of energy to do things, but the limitations are very severe. And still we face the danger of military coup. At this very moment, things are under control, but still I cannot say to you that democracy is fully established. It's a very transitional, a very delicate moment. Hopefully, we will manage to stabilize the political context so that policy can be really enforced. But for the last 2 weeks, all we have is just fears and hope. And with that, I finish my long exposition. I'm sorry.
Thank you so much, Elisa. And that's a absolutely broad kind of framework for thinking, at least, about the public good, higher education. Thank you so much. And I'll wait for hands to go up. But before we do that, I'll ask a couple of questions and then see how how others come in. One of the things that we saw with COVID-19, was this kind of this need for speeded up science and speeded up discovery and so on, which was, and I think that, we have to really just sit back and wonder at just how effectively science kind of responded. I mean, I think it was really amazing. But at the same time, just in terms of the role of universities on introducing knowledge for public good and so on, what we also saw was the kind of this interaction of science at this nexus, with power and policy and profit, if you like, the 3 Ps. Is that a challenge, do you think, in terms of the long-term approach to thinking about the production of knowledge as a public good, or do we have to navigate that? I mean, I like your idea of taking a balanced approach, I mean, to these tensions, if you like. Would you like to kind of comment on that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, I think there is a question of timing in the pandemic issue. And if you think it was not only science that hurried up, if you think of the number of countries which immediately enforced emergency funds to help everybody. And why? Because at that moment, there was an acute perception of the negative externalities of the crisis. I mean, it was common to see on Brazilian and also international TV, people saying, oh, now we have an idea how unequal we are. No, everybody knew about inequality. It's a question of experience it as a danger. Brazil, I mean, despite all the conservative bias of our president at the time, Brazil was, I think, the first country to enforce emergency funds. They were very generous into a large portion of the population. Because at that moment, people feared the consequence for themselves. And there are previous examples of that in previous pandemics. The immediate, when everybody has the fear to be contaminated, then you are all together in the same boat. But very quickly, the same boat starts to stratify people. And like I think some people even announced, I remember this Nobel Prize economist at Yale, I forgot his name. He said, as soon as a vaccine emerges, there will be less willingness to help the poor. And that's why I think the question of opportunities are really a question of opportunism. You have to jump. It's not only education, everything in this life is a question of combining opportunities, constraints, and wise choices. I think the same example of the pandemic is valid for everything. The pandemic is good because it dramatizes the picture. And I think now people are not so aware of the commonalities they share, but still, because it's too recent, it's time for nations to set task groups to prepare for possible new pandemics. Yeah. I think there is a time span, maybe 3 years, 5 years, I don't know, but for a short time span, it's possible to work on preventive programs. Once it fades out, the memory fades out, then people start behaving egoistic again. That's my feeling.
So I think it's a wise approach. I think many academics sort of have a tendency to kind of to opt for one or the other. Kind of we bifurcate discussions sort of unifying. And I think it's a nice approach to think about. Kind of thinking about how to balance these tensions, if you like, and there are tensions. I mean, there are real tensions. Of course, one of them, of course, is this pressure on universities to commercialize, and of course that also mitigates against, or at least it pressurizes against the role of universities in producing private goods, if you like, public goods at least. So yeah. There aren't any hands up yet, so let me pursue another kind of route. I really like your idea of, and it links with what we just spoke about. If we think about the grand challenges facing humanity, whether we talk about the SDGs or any other framework, it's quite clear that we have this very big challenge now, right, of understanding two things. I mean, the one is the idea that these are both local and global challenges. They have to be dealt with at both levels. And universities are kind of perfect for that because they are located in place, but they're also global because of their knowledge production. But there's a second side to that, which is, should we be thinking about, proactively thinking about the creation of a global commons of scholars and scholarship and so on? Is that something that we should be working on?
I think so. I think the idea that knowledge has no borders and no passports, it's something fantastic. And in some sense, scholars belong to a separate country. They share commonalities among themselves. That's why I so much bet on science diplomacy. But we have common interests across borders. We as scholars, we academics. Of course, we have common values, common ambitions. So why not put that together? It's when I say that, I am not unaware of all the difficulties. I am from the South. I'm never sure if I am invited to something in the North because I am the token South American or because I am a total women South American. There is those kind of things. I'm aware of it, but I also know that I share things with people. There are commonalities. I'm giving a personal example, but it's universal. We all share values about knowledge. So why not stress that? I think science diplomacy should work not only to help governments to understand each other, but also to create some sort of global governance for science.
Thank you so much. I think that's I think it's a conversation that we have to pursue. I think it's and just in the context of kind of this shifting geopolitics, which might make it very difficult as we head into the future. Yes, so is there a need for us to think about sort of a new approach to non-alignment, things like that? I mean, I think it's something that we might have to pursue as we go into the future.
Yeah, I very much agree with you. I think as we don't know what sort of world balance will emerge, it's very unstable right now. So we have to strive for that. We don't know which side we will be considered tomorrow. Before they put us on boxes, let us overcome the boxes and have something for science.
There's a question in the chat box. Cynthia, do you want to come in, or would you like me to read it out?
Yeah, I can just read it very quickly.
Yeah, please go ahead.
So, thank you very much, Professor Elisa, for your very special presentation. I'm originally from Brazil, so I had experience at the University of São Paulo, and we're living a very delicate political moment. So I was just wondering, with your experience, if you'd have any vision for the future of the role of the Brazilian government in shaping the public good of education over the next decades, if you'd like to share your thoughts specifically about the political scenario for the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you for the question. At this moment, Cynthia, I think we are all working on our wishful things because we don't know how priorities will be settled. There are so many urgent things. The latest one is this terrible crisis of the native in the Amazon who are starving. It's kind of a genocide. Every moment we are surprised by emergent things that we didn't expect to be so urgent. So in that sense, I think, of course, the new government has excellent people in education. I know several of them. I trust them very, very well, very competent people. But there will be too many urgent things to do, and the funds are very limited. So we have to, I'm afraid there will be some frustration in the short run because it will take time to be able really to put science and the universities in general in the track again. but the will is there. So it's a question of being very attentive, of demanding without disturbing too much the political scenery, because we don't have clarity about support from very important institutions like the army, for example. But the prospects are much better. Just to be relieved from the fear that was spread before, it's a great advantage for knowledge. I mean, in many universities, there were real dangers, I mean, personal risks for professors and for students if they were to speak freely. So now this fear is lifted. And so that's a very good instrument to start with. How far we'll be able to move, I don't know, because funds are really limited and time is short. And I'm afraid some people will be frustrated and may feel alienated from the new plan. So I think especially social scientists have a very tough task, because they are the ones who could help decoding the situation and see how to navigate.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. That's excellent. Yeah, I mean, I feel a bit invigorated again. It's coming from South Africa, like just to kind of with the changes over the last month or so. But in particular, just the hope that the India, Brazil, South Africa sort of energy can sort of re-emerge, if you like. It's been an absolutely wonderful platform, which basically died, during the Bolsonaro period.
Yeah. Lula is talking about revitalize it. I don't know if he has the means, but at least in the context of South America, he's doing it. Just today, he's in Argentina, striving to unite Latin America again. So we are in a good track. And you know what? I think we need to fight for optimism. It cannot be naive optimism, but if we accept the depressive mood that is taking the world, because there are, of course, we have very serious problems, but we need some new enlightenment. We need to think of our capacity to think as generation of roots.
Yeah, thank you so much. And it's been a wonderful discussion. And now you can go to bed. I'm so sorry to keep you up. But just for our colleagues on the call, just to say that next week on Wednesday at 3 o'clock, we'll have Professor Sibongile Mutwa, who's the Vice Chancellor, or the equivalent of President, at the Nelson Mandela University, who'll be talking about an experiment in engagement, sort of thinking about the university as what you might think of as an anchor institution in a very, very depressed region of South Africa, and trying to understand how to sort of embed that university in development and so on. So that's next week at 3 o'clock Tokyo time. And we'll of course send out reminders to you and so on. So thank you so much, Elisa, and look forward to being in contact with you again. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and thank you to everybody for listening to me. Bye now.
Bye.